The dragon had lived longer than most rivers had flowed, and longer still than the first mountains had cooled. He had watched the rise and fall of kingdoms and the fading of songs. Once shouted to the skies, now only whispers in the fog. He had grown tired of the noise of the living, and so he built his home at the edge of the city, where the forests thickened and the towers thinned, where smoke curled upward like the breath of old gods, and the people who still remembered left offerings at the border stones, small trinkets, flowers, sometimes gold, never out of fear but out of habit, for it was said that as long as the dragon slept, the storms would sleep too. He spent his days half dreaming, his scales dull like stone, his wings folded across his back like the ruins of a temple. His heart beat slow and deep, a rhythm that matched the earth itself. He had fought so many wars that even his scars had grown quiet, and he thought perhaps this silence was a kind of peace, one he had earned after centuries of flame and fury. But one morning, as the mist rolled low and the sun crept over the horizon in thin streaks of amber light, he noticed something on his shoulder, a small mark darker than soot and smooth as glass. It shimmered faintly when the light touched it, the way embers sometimes do before they die out. He snorted a plume of smoke, amused for a creature of his age. A mark was nothing. Scales grew brittle and cracked in time. This he knew, yet as he turned to rest again, the mark seemed to pulse ever so slightly. He felt the flicker deep under his skin, a warmth that did not belong to him. It was almost like a second heartbeat, soft and unfamiliar. He shifted his wings, dismissing it as the echo of an old burn, but the warmth lingered there like a whisper, refusing to fade. The days that followed brought wind and rain and quiet, and yet that warmth stayed. Each night it grew a little stronger. Each morning the mark seemed a little darker. Once he tried to scrape it against stone, to peel it away, but the scale would not yield, and the mark pulsed in response as if offended, and he thought he heard something, then a faint hum that might have been memory, might have been warning. He wandered the forest, restless, the earth trembling slightly beneath his steps, the birds keeping their distance, the sky watching in silence. He told himself it was nothing, for dragons are not made to fear small things, but still he caught himself glancing at his reflection in the pond, the mark gleaming faintly beneath the surface, its light soft and sickly and alive. By the end of the week the dragon no longer laughed when he saw it. He no longer slept deeply, for the warmth had turned to a slow burn that reached into his bones, and when he dreamed, he saw flashes of shapes he could not name, a fire curling backward, of a voice calling from beneath the skin of the world. And when he woke, the mark was still there, still glowing, still waiting. The dragon woke before dawn, the mist still heavy in the valley and the trees whispering low as if warning him not to rise. He stretched his wings, feeling the ache of centuries grind through his bones. His reflection flickered in the pond beside him, and again the mark glimmered back, a single dark eye beneath his scales, breathing slow and steady like something alive. He told himself it was only light bending through the water, but the lie felt thin, and the morning colder than it should have been. He and had flown through fire once and crossed mountains that spat molten stone. He had carried storms on his back and roared thunder into the hearts of kings. He was not built to be unsettled by something so small, yet this spot, this silent wound, this pulse beneath his hide, it clung to his thoughts like smoke in his lungs, and even when he tried to shake it off, the burn beneath his shoulder deepened. The pain, not sharp but heavy, the kind that waits, the kind that watches. He tried to distract himself. He hunted across the moors, his shadow spreading over fields and rivers and frightened sheep, but his hunger faded as quickly as it came, the taste of ash on his tongue, the heat inside him rising with every breath. When he landed to rest, the ground hissed beneath his claws, the grass curling black at the edges. The mark glowed brighter, then soft but insistent, like the slow opening of an eye. At night, the dreams came clearer. He saw fire, but not his own. It burned blue and white, the color of forgotten skies, and in the center of it stood a shape, coiled and massive, its body a mirror of his, but hollow as smoke. Its voice came through the flame, not as sound but as memory. "You swore," it said, "you swore." And when he woke, his cave was trembling, dust falling from the ceiling, the air tasting of iron and rain. He went to the stream that ran beneath the ridge, and lowered his shoulder into the cold water. Steam rose around him, the mark refusing to dim, instead glowing stronger beneath the surface. The current bent around it, twisting as if afraid to touch. He could feel his heart fighting something deeper within him, an older rhythm, one that had been buried beneath centuries of silence, now waking again with every breath he took. The dragon growled low, the sound more plea than threat. He scraped at the stone again, until sparks flew and scales cracked, but the mark remained Smooth, unbroken, unyielding, it pulsed once and the forest shuddered in answer, leaves trembling from branches as if caught in a wind that did not exist. The sky itself seemed to pause, the color draining from the horizon for a single heartbeat. He stood there motionless, the weight of the world pressing through his chest. And though no one was near, he felt a gaze upon him, something ancient, something waiting, and for the first time in longer than memory, the dragon felt a flicker of fear, and he did not know if it was truly his own. The dragon did not sleep that night. The stars turned above him cold and distant, and the earth beneath his claws pulsed with the same rhythm as the thing beneath his skin. He watched the dark horizon where the city lights shimmered, faint and restless like a scattered necklace of fire. He had not gone there in centuries, not since the treaties were written, not since the last of the wars, but now the thought crept through him that maybe the humans might know what he did not. The mark throbbed again, sending a shiver through his wings. It was no longer a mere patch of color. It had begun to spread, faint silver lines trailing outward like rivers under glass, connecting to the veins beneath his scales, each one glowing faintly. When he moved, he could hear it. Now a low hum like a distant choir, or the murmur of deep water, a sound that did not belong in this world. He tried to breathe it away, but the sound stayed, and it whispered in a voice that was neither word nor tone, just memory. It showed him flashes of places he had long forgotten, a plain of black stone, a serpent with eyes of ash, a circle of fire that closed like a gate around them both. He shook his head, trying to scatter the vision, but the whisper lingered, curling through his mind like smoke, refusing to leave. He rose and spread his wings, the night wind catching on the ragged edges, the pain beneath his shoulder flaring with every beat. He flew low across the valley, the trees bending beneath the gust of his passing, the rivers below shining like veins of moonlight. He felt old but alive, and somewhere beneath the pain he felt the pull of the city, like a voice calling his true name. As he neared the edges of human land, the air grew sharper, filled with the scent of metal and rain. The towers glowed in the dark, their windows bright as tiny suns, and the sound of machines thrummed like a strange new heart. He landed in the outskirts where shadows were thicker, and the streets quiet and empty. The humans did not look up when the ground shook beneath his weight. They were used to thunder and to miracles. They no longer feared either. He folded his wings and lowered his head to hide the glow from the mark, but it shone through the cracks between his scales, spilling soft silver light onto the cobblestones. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat and the rhythm of the city until he could no longer tell which was which. His chest ached with the confusion of it all. He stood there for a long time, the great shadow of his body stretching against the lights of the street, the whisper in his mind growing stronger now, speaking not in words, but in summons. Come, it said, come and remember. And though he did not understand, he found his claws turning toward the river where the clinic lights shimmered faint in the distance like a promise or a warning. The city was half asleep when the dragon reached its heart. The streets glimmered with rain and light pooling in silver streams that mirrored the stars. Above, the humans moved like ghosts wrapped in the hum of their quiet machines. None of them looked up. None of them saw the shape that passed through the clouds. Only when the dragon landed near the river did the wind shift and carry the scent of ash and storm into the night. He folded his wings close, trying not to break the bridge beneath him. The stone trembled, but held his eyes, caught the reflection of the street lamps, and for a moment he saw himself not as the creature of legend or ruin, but as something fading, his scales dull, his breath shallow. The mark, now a beacon beneath his shoulder, bright and relentless. It burned without heat but with weight, pressing through every vein, every bone. Across the river, the clinic waited, a small square of light between taller buildings, its windows warm and still. The dragon could hear the faint rhythm of human hearts within the place, the murmur of tired voices, the shuffle of shoes on linoleum. He hesitated, unsure what they could do for something older than their oldest gods, but the pull of the mark was stronger than his doubt, and he took one slow step forward, the bridge groaning under his weight. When he reached the door, he lowered his head, so his eye aligned with the small glass pane. The humans inside froze for a heartbeat. One screamed, another dropped their metal tool, but a woman in white did not move. She looked at him with eyes steady and bright. She opened the door, though the wind from his breath blew her hair back, and the papers from the counter scattered like frightened birds. She raised her voice over the storm in his chest and asked softly, "What is it that hurts?" The dragon lowered his head until his breath brushed her face. The mark throbbed beneath his scale, sending light across the walls. He told her, "It began as nothing, a shadow on my skin, and now it will not let me rest." His voice was low like the crack of distant thunder, yet She did not flinch. She motioned for him to follow her voice, calm as the river behind them. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of antiseptic and metal, a strange clean scent that made him think of old rain. The nurse guided him through the hall, her steps sure though the floor trembled with each of his breaths. She led him to a chamber large enough for his head to rest upon its floor. She said she would look closer, her hand rising toward the mark. The dragon hesitated, the burn beneath his skin alive and wary, but her gaze held no fear, only purpose. When her fingers touched his scale, the light pulsed brighter, spilling across the walls. The hum returned deeper, now fuller, as if something beneath the mark was answering her presence. The nurse leaned closer, her face reflected in the sheen of his scales, and the dragon thought he saw within that reflection not her image but the flicker of another form, coiled and waiting beneath the skin of the world. The nurse did not pull away. Her palm rested against the dragon's scale as if it were no different from the skin of any patient. She had tended her eyes calm, her breath slow, though the light beneath her hand grew brighter with each heartbeat. The mark shimmered like liquid silver, forming soft waves that rippled under her touch, and the dragon felt his body tense, every muscle waiting for pain that never came, only the deep low hum that seemed to echo through his bones. She whispered that it was warm but not burning, that it pulsed like something alive, and the dragon watched. Her lips moved, though her words felt distant beneath the sound of the thing beneath his skin. She asked if she could bring more light, if she could see what lay beneath, and he nodded slowly, lowering his head further until his eye was level with her shoulder. She fetched a lamp, its beam sharp and white, and the moment it touched the mark, the light responded, brightening in return as if it recognized its kin. The nurse leaned closer, the reflection of the mark dancing across her face, her pupils wide. She said softly, "It is moving," and when she said that, the dragon felt the first flicker of fear since he had flown through fire. He asked what she meant, but she did not answer, her eyes fixed on the pattern forming beneath. The surface lines that glowed faintly, twisting and curling into shapes, not random, not disease, but design, ancient symbols, looping into one another, like the memory of a language older than speech. The dragon tried to shift, but his body refused. His wings felt heavy, his tail numb, as though the mark had sunk deeper, threading itself into his veins. He asked if she saw something alive inside him. She said no, not alive, not in the way we understand it, but something aware. It moves when I move, it listens when I breathe. Her words barely above a whisper, her fingers trembling though she tried to hide it. The glow crawled across his shoulder, reaching toward his neck until the room filled with its rhythm. The instruments on the counter began to rattle, the lights flickering in time with the pulse. The nurse took a step back, her expression caught between awe and fear. She said, "I think it's reacting to you, to your memories or your body, or maybe both." And the dragon felt his chest tightened as the whisper returned, the same voice he had heard in his dreams, curling through his mind. "You swore," it said again, and the mark flared so bright it turned the wall. The nurse shielded her eyes, calling his name, though she had never asked it. The dragon's body shook, the glow seeping through every crack in his scales, his breath coming in waves of smoke. He closed his eyes, trying to hold the world still, but the hum grew louder, rising until it felt like the very air was vibrating. And then all at once silence fell, heavy and complete, and the nurse stood staring at her hands where traces of the light still clung like ash from a holy fire. Silence that followed was thick enough to breathe, the air heavy with the scent of iron and rain. The nurse stood frozen, her fingers still glowing faintly with the residue of the mark. The dragon's chest rose and fell slow, his breath smoky and uneven, his eyes half open, reflecting the trembling light that lingered on the clinic walls. The machines had stopped their hum, the lamps flickered once, then steadied, but the light beneath his scales did not fade. It pulsed soft and steady, like the echo of another heartbeat. The nurse stepped closer, her shoes silent against the tile. She whispered that it was not normal, though she did not sound afraid, only awed. She said the light responded to her touch, that it felt as if it were breathing with her. She reached again, her hand trembling, and when her skin met his scale, the light flared once more, revealing beneath it thin threads of gold and silver, weaving together in slow, deliberate movement, as if forming a pattern only the air could read. She called it beautiful, the words slipping from her mouth before she could stop it, and the dragon lowered his gaze, his voice rough and quiet. "Beauty is not always mercy," he said, and the words hung between them, heavy and true. She asked what he meant, and he said he did not know, only that the light felt familiar, and that familiarity frightened him more than pain ever could. She fetched her tools, though she knew they were useless. Her instruments could measure heartbeat, blood pressure, warmth, but now whatever sang beneath the dragon's skin. Still she tried her lamp sweeping over the wound, though she no longer thought it was a wound at all. Her eyes widened as she noticed the shapes more clearly now, the runes curling into one another, forming a circle that pulsed in rhythm with the dragon's breath, each glow accompanied by a faint whisper that made the air tremble. The nurse leaned closer, listening, though the sound was not made of words. It carried meaning that slipped through her understanding. She heard fragments of memory, not her own sounds of battle wings tearing through fire, and the cry of something vast, breaking beneath the weight of a promise. The dragon shifted, his claws scraping against the floor, his breath a low rumble. He said, "The voice has returned," and she did not ask whose voice, because she already knew it was not human. The light surged brighter, the runes spinning now like the gears of a clock turning for the first time in centuries, and the dragon felt his strength drain away, the hum growing louder until it filled the entire room. The nurse shouted his name. Though her voice was swallowed by the sound, she pressed her hand harder against the mark, trying to calm it, though she did not know how. The glow climbed her arm, now wrapping her wrist in faint lines of gold that pulsed with the same rhythm. The dragon opened his eyes one last time before the room disappeared behind light and said softly, "It remembers," and then the air broke apart like glass under thunder, and the nurse found herself standing in silence again, her hands still raised, the glow fading slowly, leaving only the smell of rain and the echo of wings somewhere far away. The light did not vanish completely. It drifted through the air like mist, clinging to the walls before sinking into the cracks of the floor. The nurse stood still, her body trembling, the glow along her wrist fading slowly until only a faint shimmer remained. The dragon lay silent, his body immense and unmoving, his scales dimmed to a dull bronze, the mark no longer a wound but an open circle of light still faintly pulsing as if waiting. She stepped closer, her heart hammering but her steps steady, her voice low as she called to him, asking if he could hear her. For a long moment there was no answer. Then his chest lifted once with a sound like distant thunder. His eyes opened halfway, and their color had changed from molten gold to pale. He spoke slowly, the words thick as though dragged from the bottom of the sea. "It remembers," he said again, this time his voice softer, almost fragile. She asked what remembers, and he said, "The promise, the war, the death that never died." The nurse swallowed her fear and asked him to tell her more. She said maybe the telling could help, maybe speaking would ease what the light had awoken, and for a while he said nothing. Then his breath deepened, the air warming with every exhale, and he began to remember. He saw again the black plain where the sky had burned, the serpent king coiled in flame, the earth itself trembling beneath their clack. She remembered the moment the serpent's blood touched his skin, and the voice that followed, binding him with words he had not understood until now. He told her that the serpent had sworn return, that death was only a pause, that through the scales of his enemy he would rise again, and in his arrogance the dragon had roared his victory over that dying body, never knowing the curse had already found a home within him, sealed by blood and by pride. He said, "The mark is not a wound, it is a door." The nurse listened, unable to breathe, the hum of the light steady beneath his words. She asked, "Why now? Why after all these centuries?" It had chosen to wake. He turned his gaze toward the window where the city lights flickered beyond the rain, and said, "Because the world is changing again. The old fires stir, the silence grows thin, and the serpent remembers his way back through me." The nurse stepped back, her hands cold, her mind spinning with words she could not understand. She looked at his scales, the faint glow crawling across his side as if searching for form, the air around him humming low and deep. She said, "There must be something I can do to stop it." And the dragon gave a small, slow smile, a wary curve of ancient sorrow. He said, "No human can stop what was written in the first fires, but perhaps one can bear witness so the world will know it wakes." Then the mark brightened once more, the runes shifting into new shapes, their light spilling across the floor, and the sound of distant wings filled the air, though none moved. And the nurse felt the ground tremble beneath her as if something vast, unseen and waiting, had turned its gaze toward them. The trembling deepened until it felt like the earth itself was breathing beneath the floor. The glass on the walls shivered, the lamps flickered, and the air grew heavy. The nurse reached for the edge of the table to steady herself, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The dragon lifted his head slowly, his eyes clouded with light, and his voice low and distant as if it came from somewhere far below the world. He said, "It is coming through." And she asked what he meant, though she already felt the answer in her bones. The mark had widened, its silver edges now spilling threads of light that crawled down his arm, each strand writhing as if alive. The runes pulsed faster, forming a spiral that seemed to turn both inward and outward at once. The nurse could see faint shapes within the glow, not solid, not shadow, but something between. They moved like echoes, taking form, then vanishing again, each pulse bringing them closer to clarity. She stepped back, but her gaze would not turn away, the sight both terrible and beautiful in the same breath. The dragon's breath came hard, his body shaking with effort, his claws digging into the tile, leaving cracks that spread like rivers through stone. He said, "The gate is opening, I can feel it, I can feel him." And the nurse shook her head, whispering that it was impossible, that he was only sick, that this was something that could be cured with time, with care, with medicine. But her voice broke, because she did not believe herself. The sound of wings filled the room again, louder now, though no wind moved her hair. The ceiling above them shimmered like water. The light spread until every shadow was gone, the mark now a blazing circle across the dragon's shoulder, within it the faint shape of another creature, twisting, a serpent, vast and ghostly, its eyes open and full of endless hunger. Its voice seeped through the light, a whisper that curled around her mind like smoke, not words she knew, but she understood the meaning. "You will see," it said, "you will see and remember." And the dragon roared, his pain shaking, the walls dust falling from the ceiling as he fought to keep himself from breaking. The nurse stumbled toward him, reaching her hand out, though the air burned her skin. She called his name again, the one he had told her when he first entered the clinic, though it was older than language. She begged him to stay, to hold on, to fight whatever waited beyond the mark. His gaze found hers, his eyes flickering between gold and silver, and he said quietly, "If I fall, it takes the world with me." His body trembling, his scales cracking, light spilling through the seams like fire through glass. She pressed her palm against the mark. Once more the pain, sharp and electric, shooting through her arm. She felt the serpent's gaze turned toward her, then the whisper paused, as if uncertain, her heart pounding. She shouted that he was not alone, that he was not what the curse had made him. The dragon's roar joined her words, his voice shaking the light itself until it fractured into shards that hung suspended in the air, glowing like stars. Caught between breaths, the shards of light hung around them like 1,000 suns, each one trembling in the still air. The nurse could not move, her breath caught in her throat, the sound of her pulse filling her ears. The dragon knelt, his vast body shaking, his wings half open, the veins of light running through them like rivers of molten silver. The mark, no longer a wound but a blazing circle carved into his flesh. It sent a hollow and alive, something inside it struggling to be born. He turned his gaze to her, and in his eyes she saw both agony and recognition, as though he had finally remembered who he was meant to. Baby Serpent's voice rose again, not in words but in sound, a vibration that filled the space and rattled her bones. It spoke through the light, through the dragon, through the air itself. It was not anger, but hunger, the kind that devours memory and time. And the nurse understood that this was not a thing of evil or good, but of balance, something older than choice itself. The dragon fought against it, his claws gouging the floor, sparks flying, his roar shaking the walls until the glass above them shattered, and the storm outside poured through. Rain hissed against his scales, steam rising as water met heat, the air crackling with the scent of iron and ozone. The nurse raised her arms to shield her face, though her eyes stayed open. She could not look away from what was happening before her. The light that had filled the room now gathered at the dragon's core, twisting into a spiral of color that burned without flame. His body began to change, the cracks across his scales glowing white, his breath turning to ribbons of light that wove through the rain. The serpent's shape coiled higher, now vast and endless, its body of smoke and memory rising through the circle of light. Its eyes met the dragon's, and for a single heartbeat the storm went silent. The nurse felt that stillness deep in her chest, the pause between creation and ruin. The serpent whispered something she could not hear, and then the dragon spoke, no louder than a sigh. "I remember." And as he said it, the light exploded outward, tearing through the ceiling into the sky above. The clouds split apart, the storm collapsing inward, the rain turned to mist, and the night was filled with gold. The nurse fell to her knees, her hands covering her face, though tears of light slipped between her fingers. When she looked up again, the clinic was gone, the walls melted into open air. The dragon stood in the center of a crater, his body blazing like dawn, his wings vast and whole, the mark on leaving only smooth silver where it once burned. He looked down at her, his eyes calm again, though filled with a depth that reached beyond time. The voice of the serpent had faded, replaced by silence, soft and endless. He said quietly, "You have seen," and she nodded. Unable to speak, he turned toward the horizon, where the first light of morning broke over the city, and as he spread his wings, the air filled with warmth, the gold of new beginnings, the hum of the world waking once more. When he rose, the wind followed, carrying with it the scent of rain and fire. The nurse watched until the last shimmer faded into the clouds, her wrist still faintly glowing where she had touched him, and though the world seemed the same, she knew nothing beneath the sky would ever be ordinary again.